The first time I saw Shane, he was doing push-ups in his parents' backyard like some kind of fitness influencer, wannabe. This was March 2020, right when everything shut down and everyone was losing their minds about the pandemic. I was staying at my parents' house too, temporarily, obviously, and their yard backed up to his family's property. He'd gotten furloughed from his job and moved back home, which should have been a red flag. But honestly, he looked amazing. All that disciplined routine stuff he was doing was actually working for him. I started timing my morning coffee so I'd be outside when he was working out. Not in a creepy way or anything, just being neighborly. He was so focused and determined, counting reps and tracking everything on his phone. Most guys I knew were using quarantine as an excuse to get fat and play video games. But Shane was out there every single day, rain or shine, pushing himself harder. When I finally worked up the nerve to say hi, he was genuinely sweet about it. Asked if I wanted to work out with him, said it might be more fun with a partner. Those first few months were actually perfect. Shane had all these goals and plans, even while everything was falling apart around us. He'd mapped out this whole financial strategy for when things got back to normal. Had spreadsheets for his fitness progress. Was learning new skills online. I loved how ambitious he was. How he never just sat around feeling sorry for himself like everyone else. We'd do these intense workout sessions together. And afterward, he'd make these protein smoothies and tell me about his plans for starting his own business someday. He made me feel like I was part of something bigger, like we were building toward this amazing future together. By the time 2021 rolled around, we were practically inseparable. Shane got called back to work, but he kept up all his routines. Morning workouts, meal planning, saving money like crazy. His discipline was honestly impressive, even if it got a little intense sometimes. He'd have everything scheduled down to the minute. Work, gym, time with me, even when he'd call his parents. I used to joke that he probably had our conversations penciled into his planner, but it was working for him. And it was working for us. He was talking about marriage by the end of that year. Had already started saving for a ring. Most guys his age were still figuring out what they wanted to do with their lives. And here was Shane with a 5-year plan. We got married in the summer of 2022, and it was honestly beautiful. Both our families were there. Everyone loved Shane. My dad kept going on about how responsible and mature he was. How lucky I was to find someone so focused and stable. Shane's parents welcomed me, like I was already their daughter. The whole thing felt like a fairy tale. Like I'd won some kind of lottery by ending up with the one guy who actually had his shit together. But then we got back from our honeymoon, and reality set in pretty fast. Shane went right back to his routines like nothing had changed. Up at 5:30 for his workout. Protein shake? Checking his investment apps over breakfast. I thought marriage might loosen him up a little, make him more spontaneous. But if anything, he got more rigid about his schedule. I'd try to get him to sleep in on weekends. Maybe go out for brunch instead of his usual meal prep session. And he'd give me this look like I was asking him to rob a bank. It was always, we need to stick to the budget or I can't skip leg day or some other excuse. 3 months in, I started feeling like I was living with a robot instead of a husband. Shane would come home from work, hit the gym, eat his perfectly portioned dinner, and then spend the evening updating his spreadsheets or reading business articles. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd say he was doing all this for us, for our future, but what about our present? What about actually enjoying being newlyweds? I felt like another item on his to-do list, something to check off between his workout and his bedtime routine. That's when I started spending more time on my phone, not doing anything wrong, just talking to people who actually seemed interested in having real conversations. There was this whole community of people online who got it, who understood that life was supposed to be about more than just optimizing every single minute for maximum productivity. I started posting more pictures, actually putting effort into how I looked online, and the response was incredible. Guys were commenting, messaging me, telling me I was beautiful and interesting. It felt amazing to remember that I was still attractive, still worth paying attention to. Patrick was one of the first ones to really get my attention. He'd comment on my posts with these thoughtful responses, not just the usual hot or fire emoji bullshit. He'd ask about my day, remember things I'd mentioned before, actually listen. When I talked about feeling invisible in my own marriage, when he suggested we meet for coffee, I didn't see the harm in it. Shane was always too busy with his precious routines to take me out anywhere interesting. So why shouldn't I go have an actual conversation with someone who appreciated my company? The coffee date with Patrick was exactly what I needed. He was funny and charming, and he made me feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. We talked for hours about everything. Movies, travel, dreams, frustrations. He actually listened when I told him about Shane's obsession with optimization and planning. He said I seemed like someone who deserved spontaneity and passion, not endless spreadsheets and meal prep containers. When he walked me to my car and told me he'd love to see me again, I felt this rush I hadn't experienced in months. I knew I should have stopped there. But honestly, Shane wasn't giving me any reason to. He'd come home every day with the same routine. The same conversations about his business plans and fitness goals. When I tried to tell him I was feeling disconnected, he'd nod and say, we should schedule more date nights. Like romance was something you could just pencil in between budget reviews. Meanwhile, Patrick was texting me throughout the day, sending sweet messages and actually caring about my thoughts and feelings. He made me feel alive again. Things escalated pretty quickly after that. Patrick wasn't the only one. There was Marcus from the gym, and David from that photography class I'd started taking. These were men who saw me as more than just a supportive wife appliance. They wanted to know what I thought, what I dreamed about, what made me laugh. Shane barely looked up from his phone during dinner anymore, too busy tracking his macros or checking his investment portfolio. These other guys were actually present when they were with me. I started being more careful about my phone, more creative about my schedule. Shane was so predictable that it was easy to work around his routines. He'd be at the gym every Tuesday and Thursday from 6 to 7:30, meal prepping every Sunday afternoon, in bed by 10 every single night. It was like being married to a very attractive, very boring clock. The excitement I was finding elsewhere felt like something I deserved, something I'd been missing without even realizing it. The bedroom situation with Shane had gotten pretty pathetic too. He approached sex the same way he approached everything else, scheduled, efficient, goal-oriented, Tuesday and Saturday nights, like clockwork, unless it interfered with his sleep schedule or his morning workout. There was no passion, no spontaneity, no sense that he actually wanted me specifically. I was just another box to check, another routine to maintain. Meanwhile, the conversations I was having with other men reminded me that I was still desirable, still capable of driving someone crazy with want. I probably got too comfortable, too careless about hiding things. Shane was so non-confrontational and trusting that I stopped being as careful with my phone. He'd never been the jealous type, never snooped or questioned where I was going. His whole personality was about focusing on his own goals and assuming everyone else was as straightforward as he was. It never occurred to him that I might be living a completely different life when he wasn't around. The night he found everything, I'd fallen asleep with my phone on the nightstand instead of keeping it with me like usual. I woke up to find Shane sitting on the edge of the bed, holding my phone, looking like someone had died. He had this expression I'd never seen before, not angry. Exactly. Just completely shocked. He'd seen the messages, the photos, everything. Months of conversations with multiple guys. Pictures I'd sent that definitely weren't meant for my husband's eyes. When he asked me about it the next morning, I honestly couldn't believe he was making such a big deal out of it. Yes. I'd been talking to other men. Yes. Maybe things had gotten a little inappropriate. But what did he expect? He'd been treating me like a roommate for months, ignoring my needs, prioritizing his stupid routines over our relationship. I told him exactly that. If he'd been paying attention to his wife instead of his fitness app, maybe I wouldn't have needed to find connection elsewhere. Shane just stared at me, like he couldn't process what I was saying. He kept asking why, like he genuinely didn't understand that his behavior had consequences. I tried to explain that you can't just ignore someone and expect them to be satisfied with being your emotional afterthought. He'd stopped trying to be romantic, stopped making me feel special, stopped seeing me as anything more than another part of his optimized lifestyle. These other men reminded me that I was worth more than that. But instead of listening, instead of acknowledging his role in pushing me toward this, Shane got all self-righteous about it. Started talking about trust and commitment like he'd been the perfect husband this whole time. I completely lost it and told him exactly what I thought. That he was emotionally distant. That he cared more about his precious budget than making his wife feel loved. That he'd gotten lazy and boring the second we got married. That's when he really pissed me off. Standing there with his wounded victim act like he'd done nothing wrong. I told him fine. If he wanted to make this into some huge dramatic thing, I could play that game too. I'd call the police and tell them he hit me. I'd show them whatever evidence I needed to show them. He wanted to destroy our marriage over some meaningless conversations. I'd show him what real destruction looked like. But Shane, being Shane, had apparently been recording the whole conversation on his phone. Mr. Methodical had thought ahead, gathered his evidence, prepared his case like everything else in his effing life. When I realized what he'd done, I completely broke down. This was going to ruin everything. My relationship with my parents, my reputation, my whole life. My parents would disown me if they knew about the divorce, especially if they found out why. Shane filed for divorce within a week. He'd already consulted with a lawyer, already had his documentation organized, already planned his whole strategy. Even when his world was falling apart, he was still the same obsessively prepared person he'd always been. I tried to explain to the lawyers, to the judge, that this was more complicated than it looked, that Shane's emotional neglect had driven me to seek connection elsewhere, that his obsession with control and routine had made me feel trapped and invisible. But nobody wanted to hear about the context, about how Shane's behavior had contributed to the situation. They just saw the evidence he'd collected and made me out to be the villain. The judge even suggested I might benefit from psychological evaluation, like I was the crazy one in this scenario. When I tried to explain how Shane's rigid, controlling personality had affected my mental health, they acted like I was making excuses. The whole divorce process was a nightmare. Shane got everything he wanted because he'd been so methodical about documenting everything. Meanwhile, I looked like the unstable one because I was actually showing emotion about our marriage ending. He sat there calm and collected, presenting his evidence like a effing PowerPoint presentation, while I was the one falling apart because my whole life was being destroyed. After everything was finalized, Shane just moved on like nothing had happened. Started his business, got even more obsessed with fitness, apparently began dating again within months. I heard through mutual friends that he was doing great, making good money, looking better than ever. Meanwhile, I was dealing with the fallout from everyone who knew us, trying to rebuild my reputation, starting over completely. The worst part is how everyone acts like Shane is some kind of hero in this story, like he was this perfect husband who got betrayed by his evil wife. Nobody wants to acknowledge that his emotional unavailability and obsessive need for control created the problems in our relationship. Nobody cares that I was lonely and neglected, and just looking for someone to make me feel valued. They just see the cheating and decide I'm the monster. I tried reaching out to Shane a few months ago, thinking maybe enough time had passed that we could have an honest conversation about what went wrong. Maybe we'd both learned some hard lessons and could find our way back to what we'd had in the beginning. I sent him this really thoughtful message about how maybe we were meant to find each other again after growing and changing. His response was so typical Shane, polite but cold, wishing me healing and peace, but saying he wasn't interested in running back into a burning building he'd barely survived. Like our marriage was some kind of disaster instead of a relationship that had problems we could have worked through. He's apparently perfectly happy with his new life, his successful business, his freedom to optimize every minute of his day without having to consider anyone else's needs. So now Shane gets to be the success story while I'm still picking up the pieces. He's got his perfect little life exactly the way he wants it. And I'm the one who has to live with everyone thinking I'm some kind of terrible person. Nobody wants to admit that maybe, just maybe, if he put half as much energy into our relationship as he put into his workout routine, things might have been different. But sure, let's all pretend that Saint Shane was completely innocent in this whole situation. Let's ignore the fact that he turned into a boring, predictable robot the second we got married. Let's pretend that emotional neglect isn't a real thing, that making your wife feel invisible and unimportant doesn't have consequences. Everyone loves a simple story where there's a clear good guy and bad guy, and apparently I'm the one who gets to be the villain while Shane rides off into the sunset with his perfectly organized, optimized life. The truth is, Shane got exactly what he wanted, a life where he doesn't have to compromise or consider anyone else's needs. He can meal prep and budget and work out and build his business without anyone asking him to be spontaneous or romantic or emotionally present. He's probably happier now than he ever was when he was married, even if he'd never admit it. And me. I'm the one left explaining to everyone why things fell apart, trying to make people understand that relationships are complicated and messy, and sometimes people make mistakes when they're not getting what they need. But nobody wants to hear that story. They want the simple version where the disciplined, responsible guy gets screwed over by his selfish wife. They want to believe that being organized and financially stable makes you a good husband, even if you're emotionally unavailable and treating your spouse like another item on your daily checklist. Shane's living proof that you can win the divorce, win the narrative, and win at life just by being more methodical than everyone else, even if you're missing the point entirely about what marriage is supposed to be about.